So everybody, I will just give you a short introduction to DConnect. Thanks very much for attending today, and thank you to our speakers, Andy, Eva and Fiona, who are going to talk to their experience and I guess the needs that they see out there for data integrity. And actually we're speaking about, you know, the whole piece around collection of data, the cleaning of data, and then being able to use it and manage it for insights. So thanks for that. And as the host, just to give you a slight background on DConnect, we're a newly established digital health innovation hub at Dundalk Institute of Technology, and we're, you know, funded by a lot of local and regional supporters. Our main funder is Enterprise Ireland. We also have a lot of businesses and local government funding as well, to stimulate growth in this area and across Ireland, across digital health. Our mission is to stimulate and foster and enhance innovation in digital health, to create enterprises and jobs and services, products and help and aid that will be beneficial to the healthcare system as the burden of healthcare increases with our aging population, not just in Ireland, but across the world. There is a great, I suppose, optimism around the fact that we can now digitize healthcare, and we'll be able to take some of the burden away from the clinics and hospital setting, so that people are able to be monitored at home and self-care. So we are here as the go-to to support large and small enterprises that are in this space. We're building a bridge really between maybe the businesses that are moving into this healthcare space, or those who are digitizing, who have already been working in healthcare and are digitizing, and the third level sector and innovators and entrepreneurs who are coming up with some of these new innovative technologies to aid society and general health. We're creating a cluster. We probably, I should write, we have created a cluster. So we have almost 600 people who are affiliated with us now across connected health and well-being. We're supporting startups through mentoring, everything from getting them investor ready to prototyping. We offer that service as well for people who may not have an in-house capability in software and hardware. And we're helping to commercialize research, not just out of Dundalk IT, but elsewhere. And all of this innovation activity at the early phases is of great benefit to investors in the space, and also to the larger businesses who probably don't have the same amount of flexibility to innovate and are always looking for opportunities in this area. And so our audience is broad. As I said, we're supporting startups in various ways. There's a lot of expertise on the team in terms of entrepreneurial, I suppose, just being entrepreneurs, plus mentoring entrepreneurs and getting entrepreneurs ready for investment and bringing them through the process to be ready and to acquire funds and just model out their business and the various aspects of it. With engagement with people who are providing funding, the capital and investment sector, but also with government, who have been extremely supportive. And you know, we've relationships then with the HSE and also with private hospitals, because I think you know, having a clinical voice is extremely important for us, and to guide all of the innovation, we do need to understand the clinical voice there, and also that of the user and the patient journey. And then of course, the entrepreneurs and the universities providing that innovation. And again, the SMEs and the corporate entities really interested and very supportive, I have to say, and interested in the digital health sector and advancing that, and looking to the innovation that they see in the ecosystem. So our strategies really is to build out the cluster, and that's building. We launched last month after we've been established for a number of months, and it's right across, as I say, enterprise, the healthcare system, public and private, our funders and also society. And we are working on different collaborative, I suppose, groups and projects with various different people, from community organisations to large and small businesses. We're a knowledge hub, really. I guess we're a go-to for people who need support and who need information. We're working on a project to look at the trends across healthcare in terms of, I mean, the cutting edge at the moment worldwide, comparing that geographically and looking at, even mergers and acquisitions in the space. So staying on top of things, but also locally being able to provide support and expertise to the needs of the businesses. And we're very needs-led as an organisation. Would support a lot of early stage businesses as well. And, you know, we've a couple of serial entrepreneurs on the team who have provided mentorship to early stage businesses in the past. And we're very much doing this on a sort of a one-to-one basis at the moment. And we'll move beyond even some of the workshopping that we do to programmatic activity over the next while. And in that workshop series with this one included, we've focused on digital transformation. As I said, you know, everybody is kind of having to look at their digital, I suppose, portfolio, or their transformation to use of digital tools, or the people they're targeting are now moving digital and they need to be prepared for that as well. We do see that, you know, coming out of the Northeast, but also out of Ireland, we can be very much global from the outset. We, of course, large connections and great advantage to be very close to Northern Ireland here and connections cross-border, but looking at opportunities now with Horizon in Europe and also connections. I've worked and lived in the US, and so there's plenty of, you know, opportunity for Irish business to be big players there as well. So thinking global from the outset is our mindset on that. The team and, you know, reach out to any of us. Myself and Sarah have both entrepreneurial, I suppose, backgrounds, and I've worked in the corporate world for a long time, particularly in medtech, and also, you know, work to, you know, invest and to mentor startup and early stage companies. Sarah is a serial entrepreneur and has also worked with early stage businesses as a mentor, and she's a community and education manager. And then Sarah Fell is a wonder with technology and is running a number of projects prototyping for early stage businesses. So reach out to any of us. Our emails are here. And we're in the middle of our workshop series. We had, I think, 6 listed here, and each time one is disappearing off of it. Today's is the data integrity one, and we've one next week on e-health. And this is, again, the use, I suppose, of e-health and mobile health technologies within the healthcare sector, be it messaging apps or communication, even from, I suppose, primary care, the GP setting to patients and so on. So a lot of change happening. We're keeping an eye on it, and we're hoping to inform our audience, at least inform our audience of what's going on, and then hopefully be able to help them thereafter. So please feel free to reach out and connect with us. Our website's there, and there's a contact form on that. And then you can reach us directly at dconnect@dkit.ie as well. So we'll do a bit of messing. There'll be stop sharing and sharing as people come and go. So be patient with us as an audience. And now I'll introduce Eva from ERA Sciences. She'll introduce the team and the speakers today, and later on we'll have audience engagement. There are a number of polls. So as audience members, give a go to some of those polls. Be patient with us again. These are experimental tools, but we're hoping to make things as interactive as possible. So I'll hand over to Eva, and you can do introductions, Eva. Thanks very much.
Many thanks, Angela. I'll just start to share my screen now, and just let me know when you can see it.
You can see it now.
Yep.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. So for those of you who saw me a minute ago, I've probably disappeared now, so there's nothing wrong with your screens or anything else. It's just the video sharing on my side. You'll see the slides. So just to say, ERA Sciences are delighted to be involved with the DConnect series of workshops. Congratulations to Angela, Sarah and Sarah Fell on these knowledge sharing events over the last few weeks, and continued success with the Hub. As the audience is large and quite diverse in needs this morning, these short presentations really act as primers to the data integrity topic. So feel free to post questions in the Q&A function as we go along. And if we can't answer your questions over the morning, we'll certainly, if you want to contact us, we'll leave plenty of contact details. So how the workshop looks, we've kind of an hour and a half, just over an hour and a half to talk to you about data integrity. Very briefly, I'll tell you about who ERA Sciences are. Then we'll switch to data integrity and why it matters. I'll give that first presentation. Then Andy O'Connor from ERA Sciences will take over, and he'll talk about the importance of stakeholder engagement and why it's a key enabler for data integrity. Then we're delighted to have joining us this morning as well, Fiona Fennell from Think for Purpose. She will talk to us about collective reasoning, critical thinking skills, and we're looking forward to that presentation. And then we'll finish off the morning with a fireside chat moderated by Angela. And then finally any Q&A and close up of any outstanding questions that we might have had during the session. So hope everybody enjoys the morning. And if there's any issues with sound or video, just send a message in the Q&A. That'll work perfectly as well. So who are we, Resiliency, and what are we about? Basically, we're a boutique company. We're responding to emerging client needs and data reliability. And you'll see the terms data reliability and data integrity nearly used interchangeably during the presentation. But ultimately, when we talk about data integrity, we want to know that the data we're generating is going to be reliable over its lifetime. It'll have integrity over its lifetime. So that's the key focus of the company, talking and helping companies to ensure they have data reliability and essentially long-term enterprise resiliency. Combined, we have over 35 plus years of experience between us on the team, mainly in the life sciences and heavily regulated sectors. We aim to provide end-to-end data integrity consultancy, products and services. And we very much aim to provide a holistic, system-agnostic data integrity customer support-based model. And ultimately, we've had experience on-premise, standalone systems, to network systems on site, to data applications that are both hosted and SaaS solutions. And obviously, we're very familiar and have been involved with everything from paper records to hybrid records to complex electronic systems. Many companies are familiar with the term good documentation practices. We are more and more seeing the use of the term good data practices, and this is something that as a company we're very much engaged in, looking at both paper and electronic records and looking at harmonized approaches that manage the data irrespective of its format across your companies and sites. Fundamental to the company is the understanding of data lifecycle. So it's not just about having accurate and complete data at a moment in time. It's about making sure and ensuring that that data is available, reliable, enduring throughout its required data lifecycle. So that's absolutely fundamental to what we do. We partner with companies on their data integrity journey. And data integrity should never be seen as a done deal. We learn from the past use of data and generation of data to current data generation to future data needs. So data integrity should be seen as a journey. And it's a culture of excellence that needs to be embedded in at a site and company level. And it's something that we hope to collaborate with companies and get the most out of the data that they're generating. I have just up here a little piece about 4 pillars of success, which I'll talk to you now. Really, as a company, we have 4 key focus areas, but we believe these are what drive data reliability across companies. It's the understanding of data integrity, and in a nutshell, data integrity is about accurate, complete, secure, reliable, and trustworthy data over its life cycle. And it's about making sure that the data we make our decisions on has integrity, that we have all of the data we need to make the correct decisions. We also discuss and focus on risk perception and risk management. And we're very much about targeting the efforts within a company. So maximizing the gains and minimizing the pains. So targeting your focus with respect to data integrity. And that means that companies need an understanding of data and its criticality to the organization and the impact of data on product quality and patient safety. So these are the areas that you need in order to be able to focus your efforts. You have to understand what critical records are, what critical data is, and the need to get data back in a timely manner if you've backed it up or if you've restored it. Risk management of data means that you need controls in place across the full data lifecycle in order to realize long-term, I suppose, data integrity. Application lifecycle management and collaboration are two other core elements or core focuses of the business. And over the course of this morning, you're going to see us using different poll technologies, interactive polls using the actual WebEx, or in this case, it's a Zoom meeting, but an interactive poll in Zoom. But we also look at another technology called Slido. So being able to collaborate and get the most out of a meeting, or being able to collaborate across, let's say, life cycle management, it's very, very important in terms of data reliability. Lastly, here I have application lifecycle management. And again, Era Sciences have been leveraging tools. One of the tools we use when we're looking at application lifecycle management and brainstorming, we've been looking at Miro. And we've also been looking at tools to allow us to do data mapping. So application lifecycle management is something that's absolutely core to anybody who's looking at their overall company data reliability, whether it's an existing application that should be delivering the most at the site in terms of data and decisions, or whether it's something you're planning to implement. So you can see here, just on a very small scale here, we're mapping out an actual data lifecycle to do with the application itself. We're looking at who determines what's happening, who's generating deliverables, etc. And just on a very small level, if you can see on the screen, there's two little blue icons. These are actually deliverables that a vendor delivers in this particular site's application lifecycle management. So being able to understand the application and being able to leverage, where possible, vendor solutions, vendor deliverables is also very important. So what is data integrity and why does it matter to a company? I suppose most of us on the call at this stage will have got one, if not two, of the available vaccines, or two of the 4 available vaccines. I'm trying to think how many we now have available in Ireland. But the quality and integrity of data is fundamental to the quality of the product. And getting data integrity right ensures the manufacture of safe, reliable, and effective products. And data integrity applies whether they're paper or electronic or digital records, if you take photographs as an example of digital records. And what do we want? We want our data to show that our products are safe. And when I think about safe products, I always think about products that I give to my children, whether it's Calpol or whether it's paracetamol or whether it's a Nurofen. But all of us as a country, we're very concerned about, are we getting safe vaccines? So the data is generated by companies in order to prove that these vaccines are safe for use. And it's also very important that in terms of adverse event reporting, that when we get a vaccine, that we do actually register if we've had an adverse event to it. And then regulators such as the HPRA can then look at these safety signals associated with the product. So safe data or safety is guaranteed by the data we generate. Reliable, if we take the vaccine that we were all administered, it came in a syringe. So the manufacturers of syringes, we need to know they're reliable, they're not going to break when they're administering the vaccine. We need to know that they're manufactured so that we can, if we're supposed to get a certain number of mils, that's what's being administered. And then that they're effective. So if I take, again, a vaccine, it's going to be effective against coronavirus, COVID-19, or if I take the paracetamol that many of us took when we were actually probably after getting the vaccine, that it was going to be effective and allow us to mitigate a headache, for example. So from a personal level, we all understand why data needs to be reliable. It's supporting the products we make and it's supporting the products we sometimes take. And data supports the entire product life cycle. So we're generating an awful lot of data. We generate development data when we're developing products. There's validation data. So when we finish the development phase, we move into validation phase, and we're generating, again, a lot of validation data. And then when we formally start to manufacture, there's manufacturing data, there's calibration data, there could be requalification data if there's parts of our process that need to be re-engineered slightly and we may have to requalify. There's overall testing data and then final approval data. So when we release our product to the market, we're generating even more data, or we're receiving even more data. We'll have marketing surveillance data, there could be adverse event data, there could be complaints data. And if you think about your QMS then data, you will have, for example, if we take QMS records, we could have CAPAs, we could have deviations, we could have change controls. So from the time we generate that or develop our product all the way to cessation, and I haven't included that in the slide because it's already busy enough, but even cessation of a product, that's part of the product life cycle. Therefore, there will be data associated with it. And then if you think about all the records you've generated across this full product life cycle, all of those records have to be maintained till we no longer need them. And depending on what industry you're in and depending on the record type, you'll have an agreed record retention period. So that's how long you have to keep your data for. Obviously, the further you're on your digitization journey, the more likely it is that your systems are integrated and the records are more accessible and centralized. But if you're at the start of that journey, it's possible and it's very likely that you will have data silos, different systems that don't connect together. So potentially, even your QMS data could be in different discrete systems, or maybe you've gone for an overall one system that delivers on everything. So some of you will have best of breed change control systems, best of breed deviation systems, and other sites and other companies may have one system that manages all of their QMS records. So in terms of where you are in your data journey, it's going to be people on the call who are very much still in the paper base. The records are mainly paper format. And obviously, the more paper you generate, the more records you have to manage. You have to start thinking about storage of those records if you're not already doing that. And then you have a decision, can I store all those paper records on site, or do I now need to move them off site? And if I move them off site, then you have to look at the management of those records off site and off site facilities. And you also have to look at the retrievability of those records. If you do need to look at something again, do I need to go back and, how quickly can I get a record back from an off-site facility? Perhaps, and it's quite likely that many people on the call are somewhere in this middle zone where they're starting to leverage technology, more technology. So where in the past you may have had paper logbooks to actually record an activity or the start of an activity or the entrance into a particular area, now starting to use smart devices, using things like e-logs to log activities. Where in the past you may have had single systems, discrete systems, applications on one PC, now you may have applications that are networked across your site. So maybe at a site level, you can look at different applications just by logging onto one client. And maybe you're perhaps fully along the journey where now you're looking at AI, you've got robotic solutions, your records are mainly electronic. So just in terms of understanding the audience this morning, we're going to just have a quick poll to see whether your records are mainly paper-based, electronic, or hybrid and paper. So Angela's just going to try and share a poll there with you, and we'll see how this technology works this morning just to share the poll. Angela, are you there?
Sharing now, and people are participating, so thanks very much. So you should be able to, as an audience member, give us a vote. Some people are shy. We only have half of the people giving a vote at the minute, so don't be shy.
I might just stop sharing for a second if you want to show the results of the poll.
I'll try. I'll see if that works. We're not sure. We haven't done this before, but we'll try and share here.
Okay, I'll just stop sharing.
Yeah. Go. We've had 7 and we have 57, so it's almost 50-50 split, but there's I suppose a more lean towards the electronic and then the hybrid. So that's actually really good. I guess this stage where we've most people who are heading towards the electronic and probably moving some of their paper over that direction.
Okay, and you can keep participating on that, and we'll look at the end result just later on today ourselves, just to understand that. But we're looking at essentially 50-50. Are we into hybrid and paper and electronic? Is that what you're saying, Angela, there?
Yeah, so we
Okay.
have 56% on electronic.
Wow, okay.
We have 33% on hybrid, and we have 11% on mainly paper.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Once you stop.
Yeah, good for you, Ava. Go.
Okay. And that's very interesting because there has been definitely a shift towards electronic in the last year or two. We were seeing a lot of companies still very much paper-based, but more and more we're seeing that shift towards electronic. And I suppose with digital transformation and people looking at their strategies of, you know, how they want to improve their business, that's certainly one of the key areas. The management concerns that the silo of records when they're paper-based, and now moving more and more towards electronic-based systems. So in a nutshell, what is data integrity? It's the extent to which all data is complete, consistent, accurate, reliable throughout the data lifecycle. So key words: complete, consistent, and accurate. Reliable. We want to make decisions based on our data, evidence-based decisions across the data lifecycle. Another definition here: complete, secure, reliable, and trustworthy. I've called trustworthy out. Ultimately, we need to be able to trust the records we've generated. That's why we make a go, no-go decision. Something is pure, something is impure. We need these records to be trustworthy. And we have to understand that good data management practices directly influence the integrity of the data across the data lifecycle. So the records that we generated need to be managed. We need to have key oversights. We need to make sure that people aren't just generating the data and they can review their own data and say it's good to go. We need secondary oversight of data. And very important, data integrity relies on an informed and engaged workforce. And an awful lot of companies invest money in training their workforce on GMPs, on data integrity. But it's not just enough to inform the workforce. They need to be engaged in that data integrity journey. They need to have the power to speak up if there's something not right, but they also need the power to speak up and say when things could be better. So there are lots of opportunities to improve the data practices. So by allowing your workforce and, you know, encouraging the workforce to speak up around data, there will absolutely be dividends paid forward with data integrity. The sources for definition of data integrity, I've just chosen the MHRA, PICS Guide, ISPI, WHO, and FDA here. But there are loads of different definitions, but ultimately the data needs to be trustworthy. And always remembering that data integrity applies equally to both paper and electronic records. Data lifecycle, for those of you who are not aware of what data lifecycle means, it's talking about data from the time it's created to the use and processing of that data, to review and oversight of that data, to retention of that data, and that's probably short to medium term retention of that data, till eventually the data is retired, when we either don't need it anymore or we take it off a system and we archive it. And kind of four key drivers of or into, I suppose, that strengthen our data integrity is our understanding of ALCOA plus, our people, empowering them, informing them, our processes, so our data governance, our SOPs, our work instructions, our checklists, and then obviously leveraging automation. And when we talk about automation at Era Sciences, we talk about very simple automation from maybe standalone instruments that maybe we're still generating paper records from, all the way through to enterprise systems, the like of LIMS, ERPs, etc. And obviously overlaying the data lifecycle is our quality management. So really data integrity should be embedded into our quality management system, and we should be continuously applying risk management to data. I mentioned there ALCOA Plus, and because the audience is diverse, this is just whistle stop. ALCOA Plus is considered the minimum attributes data should have to assure a reasonable degree of data integrity. It's a term that kind of popped up early, or I suppose mid-90s, typically used by the FDA. And then it got re-envisioned around 2016 and went from being ALCOA to ALCOA Plus. But it's the minimum attributes that data should have to have a reasonable degree of data integrity. And it really could be applied irrespective of industry. It doesn't just apply to life sciences. And it applies across the full data life cycle. So what does it stand for? Attributable. We know who has generated the data, or we know who is actually completing an action. So it could be actually data generation, it could be data management, it could be data review, but who has actually done that action? And also when we say attributable, we're talking about that the right people are doing those actions. So if you're reviewing or approving the data, you can't be the person who originally created that data. So there is a segregation of duties implied by attribution. Legible. So it's legible throughout its life cycle. So that means if it's a paper record, that I can still look at that paper record and understand exactly what happened, it stays legible. And from an electronic point of view, that it stays available and legible throughout its life cycle. Legible also means that if I take a simple example of crossing something out in a paper record, if I then apply that to an electronic record, when people make changes, that those changes tell us the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. And that's typically captured in an audit trail. Contemporaneous, it's such a big long word, I didn't fit it all here, but contemporaneous means that when we acquire data, and we document that data, we're doing that at the time of the activity. We're not post-dating, we're not future dating, we're doing and capturing that data that activity at the time. Original is very, very, I suppose, it's the one that causes people the most problems, but understanding where your original records are, where your source data is, where those original records lie. Duplication of data is definitely an issue when it comes to data integrity. We need to know where the source of the original record is and that the data is accurate. So if we're capturing a value on a computerized system and it needs to be to 4 decimal places as an example, that our system has been configured or it came as an out-of-the-box solution and gave us the required accuracy. And we also have 4 terms around this: complete, consistent, available, and enduring. So all of the data is there. Consistent, that if we follow a practice, follow a process, that we consistently generate the data and we follow the sequence in the correct way. And available and enduring means that it'll be there for the amount of time we need it to be there for. And Fiona, if we're running over time, just give me a time check. Is that okay?
Another couple of minutes, Eva.
Okay, just keep an eye. So I've just pulled one FDA, an issue that kind of comes up quite a bit. There are lots of rules and regulations around data integrity, and depending on your product, you will be compliant with particular regulations. If you're selling into America or if you're manufacturing in America, the FDA regulations apply. If you're selling into Europe, we have the European regulations. But an awful lot of people, when they talk about data integrity, talk about 21 CFR Part 11, which is an FDA regulation. It's known as the data integrity rule. And yet when you actually go and look at deficiencies, it's rare that you see these Part 11 sections cited. Instead, what we see are failures to comply with CGMP predicate rules. So when I go looking for data integrity examples for customers, or even yourselves, when you go and look to see what's happening and, like what's coming up more and more in data integrity, what are the issues? The 2 predicate rules that are most frequently cited are 211.68 and a 211.194. And 211.68 is all around automation, mechanical and electronic equipment. So things like your data not being backed up in your computerized system would fall under that regulation. Another one is the failure to review, 211.194, making sure that records are independently reviewed. And these 2 probably, of all of the citations around data integrity, I would say they make up a huge percentage. I think it was around 60% the last time we looked at this. So some potential data integrity issues you might want to think about: photocopying, the use of blank forms. You need to have master documents. If you're still using paper records, there will be master documents that you can make a copy of, and it'll be a working copy, but there needs to be a very clear process around making copies. You don't want somebody being able to take a record and photocopy it, and then you're not able to tell what was the original and what was the duplication. Management and knowing where your documentation is. So we need a very clear governance around where records are, how they're managed, how they're stored. The third graphic there is just around missing data. We have to have oversight of data. And if you take computerized systems, audit trails allow us to see data and to ensure that it's complete. But we need to be trained in audit trails. We need to know what we're looking for. We need to know if you can process something multiple times, that somebody can't then just delete one of those processed results. Very simple calculation errors, whether it's on paper or whether it's electronic, we need to be looking for calculation errors, and not all data is created equally. So there is going to be a certain amount of due diligence and risk management around what we look at when we look at audit trails. But if you have critical data, you need to be ensuring that you're checking that all of the data is there before somebody can move to the next step. Just showing this guy having a quick nap here, there needs to be enough resources to actually allow us to do data integrity and compliance right. Overstretched resources absolutely contribute to data integrity issues. And the last one here, some of you recognize this as a tape. Some of the call are probably so young you barely recognize this as a tape. But the way we store our data has changed so much in the last 20 years, from tapes to hard drives to internal, external hard drives, flash drives. Now we're up in the cloud. So understanding where our data is, and if our data is more than 5 years old, what the format is and what we're doing to make sure it's going to be available as long as we need it to be. Have we time for this poll? Have a quick check here.
We have you're a few minutes over your time, but we can do another poll. So this one is, will your records be readily available? Is that your poll, Ava? Okay.
Yeah, so I think if we just do this poll and look at the last slide there that I have. So all the material will be available, but it's just to show you potentially where risk could be.
Okay, the poll is pushed out and we have respondents coming back now, so give it a minute or two.
So lots of people, when we talk about records being available, we need to know that they're available in terms of if we back them up or if we archive them. Two different terms there. But I'll just stop sharing for 1 minute and just see. Actually, I'll let you just tell us what the results are looking like there, and I'll just go on to my next slide.
So we have the question being, during an audit, are you confident your records will be readily available? So we have 50% on reasonably confident, backup and archival routinely occurs. We have 38% on confident. We routinely challenge restoration and retrieval of data. And very confident, we have agreed RTOs and RPOs at 13%. So I think there's probably most people 50% reasonably confident, 38% confident, and 13% very confident with their RTOs and RPOs.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, are very confident people, most people are fairly confident, so we're probably in the high group here. The 13%, I don't know if that number is significant or not, 13, unlucky 13, but RTOs, this is recovery time objective. This is a term that IT and the business will agree on, but this is the time that it takes to get data back to be available. And sometimes the meaning and the shared meaning of terms is different across different functions or stakeholders in the organization, and we can have false confidence around our ability to get data back. So IT's understanding may be to get data back onto, let's say, a server on the site, whereas you may need to get data back, and you will need to get data back so you can actually interpret it potentially on your system or application. So it's just very important that we have a common understanding of terms, particularly around availability of data. So maybe the 13% will be checking that out when they go back to their site, or maybe they already know, which is fantastic. So I'm going to finish on this slide because obviously timing is an issue here, but can we choose to ignore data integrity? The pain of doing nothing and guilty until proven innocent. Well, really, if you do nothing, you fall into the guilty until proven innocent. If you don't have data to support your activities, you can't actually prove that things happen. If you don't have processes in place to manage your data, you can't actually be guaranteed that your data will be reliable throughout its life cycle. We definitely need to apply critical thinking. We need to understand our records and our record criticality. We would suggest that you maximize your gains and minimize your pain. So the biggest pain to you, if you take regulatory recall, if that could be caused because you don't have all your data there or it's not available, that's where you should be focusing your efforts. So it's certainly something we could work through. And really, I would say to you that we are assuring our customers or our products when we have data integrity, and we're actually ensuring that long-term we will have business resiliency. The pain of upfront remediation is actually way less than the pain of remediation after an audit. So it's very much, can we choose to do nothing? Can we do heads in the sand versus heads up? I would be saying to you, it's an absolutely heads up. So Andy is going to talk to you now about one of the key enablers of data integrity, which is stakeholder engagement and that common understanding. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There are actually more slides in this presentation. So I think, Angela, we'll probably share these as a PDF with people afterwards if they want them. So
sounds good. So
thanks.
we'll hand over. Thank you very much, Eva, and Andy will let you share your slides and start.
Cool, I can get stuck in here, can I?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, great. I'm just going to set myself up with a little stopwatch just so I don't completely go off tangent here. I have quite a lot to try and cover. So
I'll intervene. I'll call you.
Please do.
Somewhere. Yeah. I'll give you a warning. I'll give you a warning and then
yeah.
we'll see.
Give me a countdown. So I'll share my screen. Oh, sorry, just take these away. So you can see that there.
You can see it now. That's great. Thank you.
Very good. So this was the overview that Eva presented. Just to mirror Eva's sentiments there, yeah, we're delighted to be involved, Angela. Thanks very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be able to sort of contribute and work with Fiona as well. So, so we're on stakeholder engagement. We really wanted to give like an overview of what that means to us and our experiences and try and share it out. Hopefully, we'll give a sort of a brief on what it means to us and sort of our experiences on it, and then be able to sort of give you a look into sort of the tools that we've used and how we've engaged with stakeholders during projects in the past. So as part of the presentation, we thought we'd just throw out a curveball to the attendees. We were using Zoom polls and up until for Eva's presentation, and for this presentation, then we're hoping to use Slido. So it's slightly different. It's a polling mechanism again, but I mean, when we're talking about you know, online engagement, you know, sort of especially when we're all working from home, the tools are becoming a lot more important. So this is just to give you an impression of the different tools and how they work. And I've seen this one before, and I thought it was really, really good when I saw it the first time. So it's designed to run on your phone. So you don't need to be switching browsers from the webinar and the slides. So if you want to hold your phone up, and you can either hold the camera over the QR code, which is the scramble on the right, the barcode, or you can just go onto your browser on your phone. So I'm just doing it here as well, slido.com. And when you go to slido.com, then it'll bring up just a place for you to put in the number, and it's 221750. So that's
I did this earlier, Andy. It took me 1 minute. It's very handy. And I've used this in the past. So it can be nice for the audience to interact via this mechanism as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you can see how things will come up in real time. Hopefully once the slides are working. So I have it up here as well, and there's no active polls at the moment, but as soon as we switch to the slides, they will, and you get the chance to put in that again. So when we come to stakeholder engagement and digital transformation challenges, there's one report that I've been watching for quite a time, and it's called the StandISH Chaos Report, and it's the state of IT projects. That they sort of do a report on whether, how successful it has been, and they've been tracking it for since 1995. And so over the last 10 years in particular, what they reported was that you can see that sort of the figures haven't changed a huge amount. So back in 2009, there was 24% were considered failed projects. So they were never used, or they never reached the endpoint. In 2020, last year, we're talking about 19%. And this is a report that was generated for previous years. So this doesn't include sort of data from the pandemic. Successful being 32% in 2009 and 31% in 2020, and challenged being 44% and 50%. So they had this challenge where in the report they noticed that year on year the state of IT projects is somewhat consistent. And in 2020 they came up with a sort of a big conclusion on this, and they said they reported one factor sort of above all else that are contributing to sort of this success or failure of a project. So what do you think they reported as the biggest factor? Here's your chance with Slido. So if you haven't gone on it, hit the QR code on the left, just hold your camera over it on your phone, or just go to slido.com, and you'll see that the poll is up now. People are starting to put their responses in. So you can see it comes up in real time then on the slides. It's quite handy that way. So I'm going to give it to 10 attendees, 10 answers, and then we'll keep moving on. But it'll still be live, so you can still add in your answers into it. So of the StandISH report, 30% of people reckon that the StandISH report said scope creep was the sort of the biggest factor that meant that over the last 10 years, the IT projects, it's gone to 40%. So that the IT projects are failing because of scope creep, poor planning 27%, inadequate resources 18%, human factors 9%, underestimated complications 9%. Okay, so in actual fact, they reported it was human factors. So they said that over 10 years, despite the fact of, new methodologies, agile methodologies, project management, new standards and methodologies there, that the bar hasn't been moving much. And this is due to human factors. And our cat herder there would know all about how difficult it is to manage people. And in our experience through working with sort of lifecycle development and software development and the implementation of software in life sciences in particular, we noticed that when the business process isn't a static thing. It's a constantly sort of developing activity that happens. So the business process is developing and new changes are coming along, and it's maturing over time. But we noticed that the IT system, the changes don't necessarily keep up with the business process. Eventually the system starts to not change as fast as the business process. It starts to garner this sort of technical debt where the system is doesn't meet the needs of the business process anymore. Maybe this is where stakeholders and departments are becoming very much misaligned, because the business process are people who are using the system day in, day out. Users are getting frustrated. Business process owners are going, the system is not really working for us. We're seeing that there's emergency changes happening with the system, or perhaps it's failing sometimes, and users can't log on. You're running out of hard disk space if it's not a SaaS system. And so eventually what happens is the system sort of deviates from the business process. People realize we've actually got new requirements now. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to replace the bloody system, because this thing is just, it's a bag of bones now, and we're trying to keep it going. So there's a lot of touch points on where stakeholders are sort of the touch points with stakeholders across the system lifecycle. And this is just one example of sort of a map of a system implementation, but you can see all of the different methods of stakeholder engagement. But these are also all the places where human factors can derail a project if they're not done correctly. And I'm not, normally it's a project manager and that would sort of manage the stakeholder engagement across the project. We would advocate like a change agent to be able to manage stakeholder engagement. But during the presentation for the rest of today, we're not going to talk about all of these. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on sort of workshops or work sessions. And based on our experience, it's getting people together in the work sessions is the key to gaining alignment. If you think about it, generally when you're talking about a big project that's going to be running for 3, 6, 9, or 12 months, there's going to be a lot of upfront work, planning work, where everybody's in the same room together. And this is the only time, it's the only case where everybody, all the stakeholders of that project are in the same room together. And if you think about most of the other stakeholder sort of engagement pieces where you see here in terms of, user training, for example, or working on a prototype, most of the times it's a subset of the project team. Whereas it's the workshop, it's sort of when you put everybody together at the start, that's where you have the opportunity of gaining this alignment at the start. So these work sessions are really the key to gaining alignment across all the stakeholders. That can be derailed. Sometimes it's treated as like a team building or a motivation event. But it's not. I mean, that shouldn't be the focus of it, but team building can happen on it. And it's about getting the right people in the right room at the right time. And it's about, active listening, getting people engaged in the room, getting people enthusiastic, making sure there's a diversity of experience, ensuring that people get creative, they're aligned to a vision, and that people have a forum then for if they're not happy with something. So you want this diversity of stakeholders, but as you can imagine, it brings bigger challenges to get them aligned, but there's bigger opportunities if they are aligned. Does it sound easy? I think our cat herder is back to herding cats again. So another slide up, Paul. It's only the second. We only have 2 in the presentation, so this is the second one. What challenges have you experienced in a workshop setting? So if you didn't hit slide out the first time, you can hit the QR code on the left, or if not, if you have to use it already, then it should be still in your phone. So so if it's so this one is slightly different. It's not a poll as such. It's a word map. So for example, like a shouting match, for example.
I'm putting in dominance. I find that you'll be in a workshop where you have one voice that becomes dominant.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. So I'll give people another quick minute to throw down a couple of ideas. So we're getting a lack of participation. I like that one. So sometimes, and I've been there myself, where you're sitting in a meeting room and there's other maybe dominant people, like you said, Angela, or maybe there's like senior involvement, and you feel like, oh, I probably should just sit in the corner and keep quiet here. I probably shouldn't contribute. Lack of clear scope, so we don't really know what we're doing here in the first place. Is a good one as well. Relevance, dominance is what you said, Angela. and keeping the topic on point for sure is a big one as well. So when people are waffling on, and like I am now, and we need to just get back onto the presentation and back on point. So we've hit the 10 people. I've hit the magic number of 10. That's all I'm watching for. There's more on the meeting, but not everybody's going to be on slide on such. So I'll just keep going on. Shoutmatch is coming up on a big one. So if people are putting in sort of similar ones, then they'll come up bigger. So so everything that was mentioned there, which that was really, it was an interesting experiment. Everything that was mentioned there is all based on our biases. And everything that you experience in a workshop, and when it comes to sort of human factors, it's around, everybody has these biases. We all have biases, and they influence our thinking, they influence what we do. And a workshop, when you get down to getting people together, these biases start to come into play, and we really have to sort of implement tools that are going to be able to allow us to navigate our biases a bit more. So a couple of examples there is like an anchoring bias. So once you have an idea of something, you don't want to change your idea. You're not willing to accept, you're over reliant on sort of information that sort of that they've heard first. A confirmation bias, we only want to hear what information confirms our assumptions. And there's lots more. We've got 20 here, but do you think there's 20? There's actually over 200. And these biases, I'm sure, helped us in the Serengeti when we were running around chasing animals or being chased by lions. But when it comes to running a workshop and trying to get a project on track, these biases are the things that are really going to derail us. On the left, my family is very much can be a shouting match at times. We're quite we've got strong opinions. Confirmation bias then is, we see it in the news all the time. We hear about bubbling in social media, you know, and that echo chambers as well. These are our biases coming out. So in a workshop, you know, to prevent these biases from coming out, really what we need is a framework for us to follow. And the framework that we've been using to good effect is a design sprint. Design sprint, an iterative process, so it's agile, and it's to guide a group in innovative problem solving. It was developed at Google Ventures, and they sort of mashed together scientific methods, so it's very much experimental led. There's a design process involved because it has to be creative and it has to be human centric, and then it has to be sort of iterative, continuous, and the agile philosophy comes out. And so this design sprint was kind of an output of experiments at Google Ventures to help startups, especially, to really sort of drive hypotheses and innovation into the market. But the principles are the same and can be used for us when we're implementing a software system or doing digital transformation. So there's quite a lot. There's two main books recommended. Design Sprint is a book itself, and then Sprint is the one that was developed at Google Ventures by Jake Knapp. The Design Sprint book there is on my bookshelf. One of the attendees, I think today, has my other Sprint book. So the main principle that I want to just give you from this slide is this concept of diverge and converge. And it's the only principle that I want to give you here. The big part of it is that people don't go together in a shouting match. What people do is we work together alone. And so you formulate your own idea about a certain aspect of the workshop, and you do that silently. And then you eventually, what you do is you come together as a group and everybody puts their ideas on the board. And so then what you do is you converge then together, and then you make choices about what direction you want that sort of topic to go. So some of the sort of the tooling that's used for a design sprint, just to give you an idea of it, a discrete vision is set. There's an agenda set as well to keep people on track. We use a whiteboard online. I'll show you an online whiteboard soon. Timer to keep people on track as well, and then some strong principles, and that be hard on ideas, soft on people. You know, we don't want to be slating our colleagues. We start with a clear goal. We empathize with the problem. So you know, everything is about, you know, if we're implementing a new software system, it's about trying to find what's the what the problem is, why are we implementing it, and then is this the right solution? But the key one then is working together alone, where we do this diverge, we go away together, we formulate our ideas, and then we converge and we come back again.
Just Andy, on time, you mentioned timing.
Perfect. Very
5
good.
minutes max now.
5 minutes. I'll take that 5 minutes if you don't mind.
Excellent.
So this is just more information that on how it works. We can share the slides afterwards. So why do we use a design sprint? I think we covered it. It's agile. It encourages creativity, gives everyone a fair voice. Did my slides just go, did they?
Yep.
Yeah.
God.
You did. We're looking at your holiday photograph.
My PowerPoint just crashed.
Okay, hold on.
It's coming back.
We'll crank it back.
I think you were speeding up there. You decided that's too fast for me.
That was interesting on your point there, Andy, about the diverging and converging as well. In social psychology, if we're running a team conversation, we'd call that opening a line of inquiry or opening a line of advocacy. So your slides are back now. So that was just filling in.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, we must. That could be part of our chat afterwards. I'm interested. So I think we covered why we would use it. On the slides as well, we have a case study where we implemented a new sort of framework for running projects at a pharmaceutical company. So it was a lot of work that was put in to say, how can we run projects better to implement software systems? And we'll share the slides so you can have a peek through the information there. We facilitate in two ways.
And we do have a little bit of time at the end, so you can slow down. I think you probably go.
Well, what I want to do is I want to just get to the last slide here, right? Which is that we have a Miro board. People can take the link and they can have a browse through it in their own time later on. And it's just, so it's an online whiteboard that we have used ourselves to actually diverge and converge between ourselves on this workshop. And so it'll give people a flavor of how exactly it looks. I have it open here. And I can just show it to you really quickly. So if people want to take down the link, I don't think we can share it in the chat, can we? We can throw it up again.
I can try, but we'll need to leave it.
Yeah, I can throw it up again anyway. But essentially here,
I can share the link in the chat.
You can't. There's no chat. You can put in a question. People might be able to
put
see
in a question with a link on it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We can share up the link again. Basically, it's to give people, if we share the slides, that the link will be on the slides as well. We can keep the Miro board open for a couple of days. But basically, the main sort of presentation here is that you can see that here are workspaces where both myself and Eva say worked on this board. Because it's really good to sort of see a real live example of it, rather than just sort of on a very sort of conceptual level. It can be very hard to visualize exactly how it works. But what we have is these sort of individual workspaces where we would set a timer for 5 minutes, say, we have an agenda, we have a brief of what we want to do. So we have 4 sort of boards, and then we spend time saying, what do we want to get from the workshop? And we might spend 5 minutes then doing a dump on our own workspaces. We drag all the post-its together, and then what we do then is we sort of drag them together, like you see here, into categories to see where the trends are. And that trends then help us to sort of understand, and here are the things we could do. And it's sort of to encourage as much creativity as possible. And then we make decisions about what we will do. And eventually we get some workshop titles, and eventually we build a draft agenda. And you can see then, I think there's a parking lot, and we would often have a decision board as well. So that's a whistle stop. I'm sure, Angela, I'm well above, and we'll share the slides so that people can do a deeper dive themselves, I think.
You're fine. I don't want you to rush, because we did have a bit of plus minus time in there. But this is a method that I would have used many years ago. I think the design thinking piece that keeps getting used in different methods, you know, that sort of individual creativity in a group, as you say, working together alone, but certainly having your group together I've worked in corporate world for 10 years and worked on teams that were spread across the globe, to be honest. We call them core teams, but they were made up of different functional groups, each with their own agenda, as you say, a bias, but certainly even an agenda coming into meetings. But practicing this where you'd have individual opinions separately, so that everybody gets their say in some
fair
sense.
voice.
And then, and then, allowing, there's even, I see the voting up here with those stickies where you pop up your little red or blue sticker here. That allows people then to individually also look at what others have said and see, do they concur? And nobody at this stage has been able to shout. So it's a nice process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Lovely. And I think this is a tool you would use with people when you're interacting and consulting as well with the groups of people you bring together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just to say that, so this kind of shows where we're leveraging innovation as well. So in the old days, you would have been putting stickies on walls and mapping processes out, or mapping or brainstorming. Now everything is electronic. We can lock it. So once everybody is commented, we can lock it, or we can leave it open so it can be added and it's there as a record, an electronic record of what's happened. And then it gives us the era, the past, past decisions we've made, and we can go back and we can look what's in parking lots. So it's very useful as a tool, but from a stakeholder point of view, I think Andy and I would say 100% it delivers.
Well, I hope
and
your life cycle managing that as well now. That's really important.
Absolutely.
I think we'll head over to Fiona. We had a break popped in there for the audience, but I think we're very engaged. I think the mechanisms in terms of polling is great. And then Fiona, if you're ready, you might sort of share your slides.
Sure. Actually, before I share my slide, just a few link-ins there with Andy and Eva. I use Miro as well, and I use it for cognitive training teams within medtech and pharma. And we've collaborated on a few Miro boards, and Eva's participated on some of those workshops too. But some of the interesting, I suppose, observations would be, it is important to start with definitions, and I better define what collective reasoning is so that we start in the same place. Particularly because I understand, even my own limited experience, I suppose, with data, is even, something as simple as backups. We've discussed this before, Eva. The definition of what a backup is can be very, very different from a data or systems point of view between vendors, or between vendor and customer, or even between staff within the same companies. So I'll just define collective reasoning, I suppose, first of all, is the process that results in us learning or understanding the reasons and beliefs behind the decisions that a group makes or the predictions that they make. And quite interesting, Andy was talking about biases there, and biases aren't all bad, actually. They are our mental shortcuts and they can be very efficient. But what generally happens is they don't exist in isolation from one another. And we usually see them interacting in terms of how they influence collective reasoning and group decision making. So for instance, one of the biggest enemies of critical thinking is actually over-reliance on authority. So when the one person shouting the loudest is the authority figure, that really does close down that type of active participation that you want within those particular workshops. But there are ways and means of adjusting that. So for instance, if we're asking individuals to make probability judgments, they might be assigning risk priority numbers, for example. One of the ways that we can control bias there is that we can, yes, get the risk, the RPN from the person who's making the assessment, but we don't share that with the group, and we don't identify whose number each RPN is. We look instead at what was the rationale behind the RPN. We share all the rationale. So everybody does that individually, separately. We come together as a group, we share the rationale, and then we start to reassign RPN numbers from there. So it's blind. We've been presented with that data without knowing who was the source of that data, etc. So
sorry, Fiona, what is RPN?
A risk priority number, sorry.
Risk priority number. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So there are ways and means that we can control for biases within groups. And I suppose that's, a lot of what I'll be discussing during my presentation. And I suppose just to make the point too, some of the mistakes that we make, within IT projects would be that we're optimistic by nature and we have an optimism bias. And what we'd like is that pilot tests and pilot runs run smoothly. And instead then of actually acknowledging, what we might have learned had those pilots gone badly, we're so optimistic that they'll go well that we overlook a lot of errors that can occur that could derail the particular projects. So we need to get the balance right, I suppose, between balancing hard data and soft judgment. So I'm going to talk a lot about models, but not so much data models, more so mental models. And what are the methods that we can use to ensure that teams do make better decisions together? Sometimes it's not more data that matters, as Andy was saying, but actually more different perspectives. So how do we get that multiplicity from the point of view of methods and different people's inputs? And I suppose, you know, from the point of view of healthcare, I've worked within, that's my first job in industry actually was in the NHS. So I want to use some particular examples from healthcare too, if I can. So very briefly, what Think for Purpose does, it delivers cognitive training for teams in pharma and medtech, as I said. So we help people understand not what to think, but how they think using a problem-based learning approach. So let's look today at what cognitive psychology teaches us about how data might improve or not our critical thinking and our team processes. And with greater complexity in our work, really it's becoming a challenge. As the brain works a little bit like an anticipation machine, we'd like to know what's coming ahead of time. And uncertainty very much derails us and interrupts our decision-making flow. Yet this isn't the full story, because ironically, machine learning has taught us a lot about human learning. We've designed computers very much in our own image. So one big thing we have in common is that everything we understand about the world is a model. And since data works best in tandem with the story and vice versa, I'm going to start with two stories from healthcare, just to see what we can understand a little bit better in relation to where data and soft judgment come together. So let's take the story of these two different doctors to illustrate some points about expert judgment and hard data. We'll strike a gender balance, because whatever about artificial intelligence, one thing we know about collective intelligence is that it works better when there is a gender balance. So on the left, Alice worked in oncology in the 50s, and she began to study childhood cancer, and she collected secondary data and found an anomaly. There was a correlation more between childhood cancer and affluence rather than poverty. So with a meager £1,000, so one shot at her research, she looked for a cause. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, to be honest, but she interviewed mothers, asking a really wide array of questions, from how many sweets did their kids eat to the mother's prenatal care. And very early on, one thing only stood out with statistical clarity, and that was that at a rate of 2 to 1, the mothers, I suppose, of children who had died had received prenatal x-rays. And she published her findings both in the Lancet and in the British Medical Journal. And then what happened? Well, actually nothing. It was only 25 years later that the medical establishment accepted her findings. And then looking at Dr. Atul Gawande here on the right-hand side, he was a surgeon who was asked by the WHO to design a pre-checklist in the 80s, a pre-surgery checklist, where over 150,000 deaths post-surgery worldwide, where half of those were preventable. And his checklist was shown to at least reduce post-infection rates by 36% in every hospital it was used. But what's interesting today, when I looked up the figures, is that only 10% of hospitals worldwide use this checklist, even though 78% of surgical staff say that they would like to. So what's happening here? I suppose it's illustrating a few things to us. One of the things, firstly, is no amount of data overcomes complacency or overconfidence. And that's not the full story, because it's also an opportunity, I suppose, to look at how we actually make decisions. And at the bottom of all of this are what we call mental models. So there are beliefs about how things work, and they're influenced very much by our values, assumptions, and our, I suppose, set of beliefs around what's important, etc. And what we could see in the case of Dr. Alice Stewart was the establishment couldn't accept it, could do any harm to a patient, because its philosophy was so much do no harm. So it didn't accept her facts. And we saw with the surgeons, they couldn't accept that a simple tool like a checklist would help their complex work, so they discounted that tool. However, it's not so black and white. If we look at Alice and how her excellent soft judgment, I suppose, and how she went to solve such a hard problem. Well, the truth was, in a way, she was biased too. Daniel Kahneman is the leading cognitive psychologist in the area of heuristics and biases, and he gives us that impression, I suppose, that biases are always bad. But in actual fact, she was biased going into her research, because one of her friend's children suffered from leukemia, and that's actually what sparked her curiosity in the first place, which is a vital disposition for critical thinking. And while she started with a single case, unlike many specialists, what's interesting about her decision making was she didn't narrow her attention to that and its contextual specificity. Instead, she looked and took an outside-in approach. So she gathered a really wide array of data from a lot of different independent sources, which is also really important. And unlike the establishment, who really, I suppose, believed everything had a safety threshold, that was the single heuristic that they based their decision on to discount her findings. Instead, she was able to borrow from a lot of range of methodologies and how she went about both collecting her data and analysing it. So she used multi-stakeholder groups, for example. She gathered information in a way where, and I suppose all multi-stakeholder groups are only useful from the point of view that they're not homogenous. Also, her approach was pioneering from the point of view that it was evidence-based as well. So, because actually what was really interesting about her background was that she was interested in the fields which were only emerging at the time of epidemiology and also social science. And she integrated the ideologies from both. Even though, so she only had one shot at doing the research, she used multiple methodologies. And often that's the case too when it comes to data. We need to be prepared to use multiple models. Another thing about Alice was she was a great collaborator. She worked with a particular statistician, but in actual fact, she also kind of worked with a second statistician because the energy industry, they tried to prove her wrong by supporting another statistician to gather data. And in a way, he was her adversarial collaborator because actually in him trying to prove her wrong so persistently, he ended up proving her right. So using that falsification, I suppose, principle of science. So data, our statistics, soft judgment, it seems that in actual fact, they can have a very positive interactive effect after all. So let's go back to that hospital setting to understand a little bit more about what's above and below the line here. So above the line, I suppose we're in the area of risk, and below the line, we're looking at the area of uncertainty. And, in real life, we're making decisions that I suppose in a way straddle both those worlds. So yes, SOPs and checklists, they are very, very useful to us above the line. And data helps because facts tell us what is, and then I suppose checklists, similarly, they reduce the cognitive load then on frontline healthcare staff, as do rules, roles, routines. They also remind us too what matters most. But the plan, do, check, act, I suppose, philosophy and method, it does start to become a little bit too brittle when it comes to what's under the line. And then we're looking at increased complexity, increased contextuality, and we need more an evidence-based approach here. So I suppose, the question is, can data support what's below the line? And that's really where soft judgments have to deal with conflicting pressures, cross-cutting problems and constraints to decide which trade-offs we need to make and why. And I suppose if we take, say, for instance, the hard problem of something like identifying sepsis. So if I take an example of a nurse who's walking into neonatal intensive care, she might see a heel prick test, but the blood hasn't yet coagulated. And that's a cue to her. So she starts to collect other data. She starts to look at, okay, the body temperature, it's only slightly down, but it's trending. She sees the baby is listless. And basically what she's doing is she's recognizing a pattern. And in actual fact, in the field called naturalistic decision-making, that's really how most experts make 70 to 80% of their decisions. She then decides, okay, what would I expect to happen? And then she picks her action, which might be, for instance, ordering antibiotics. So the cognitive psychologist, Gary Klein, he, is the leading, I suppose, proponent, and he created naturalistic decision-making paradigm. And what he does is he cognitively maps how experts make their decisions, and then he creates training simulations and designs, and we can use those kind of simulations and that knowledge and that data to design better information flow. For example, if we're feeding accident information from the scene of an accident to ER, we know which cues particular specialists will be looking for. We can design better computer-human interfaces within digital healthcare, but we can also improve interdisciplinary teamwork as well by breaking down some of the language barriers that we have. So really, experts do make decisions often based on hunches, right? So did Alice, by the way. But actually, it's because, it's not magic, it's because they're using something called recognition prime decision making. And it's because they have better perceptional discrimination. They can see finer distinctions than we can, but actually looking at the same evidence. And that's what we need, is to be able to see something someone else doesn't, maybe in a set of data. And in actual fact, big data can help us do that. It can help us find those implicit patterns. And in Alice's case, what she did was also judge what was typical and identify very quickly what was atypical. So, data can definitely help us a lot with identifying and mapping critical decision methods. And in actual fact, that's what Gary Klein has done. And he's developed an early recognition software that supports experts to identify sepsis, which is actually quite difficult, to identify early enough to do something useful about it. But there are similar methodologies for things like predicting heart attacks, etc. So, the field of healthcare and cognitive sciences is definitely coming together at this stage. And we wanted to look at it from the point of view on a collective basis as well. How do we improve soft judgment from a collective point of view? And I decided to look at probabilistic reasoning here in particular, because a lot of the time, what we're expecting experts to do is predict, in one sense, where the risk might lie in the future. Risk isn't really a past, or it's not a case of looking to the past, not necessarily. It's often looking to the future and what may happen. And this is where political scientist Philip Tetlock might be able to help us out. He's the world's leading authority on forecasting. And he gives 11 commandments that I have there up in the link if you want to have a look at them. They're really, really useful. What he did was he assembled thousands of amateurs and he asked them to look at how they would predict pretty unlikely events in one sense, but events that would either happen or not happen. So these are binary decisions. And what did they think was the probable likelihood of those happening or not happening? And then he quantified that qualitative judgment. They created what are called Breyer scores. And then they looked to see, okay, how accurate were these judgments? And I suppose this is the thing. If we want to get better at soft judgment, in actual fact, we need hard data. We need to be able to quantify it so that we can improve it. And that will help us then not either over or underreact to new evidence as it comes in. And it will help us to neither be over nor underconfident in our probabilistic judgments. So he also then looked at teams, and he plucked out all the super forecasters, as you call them, the people who were very accurate, actually. And he looked to see, well, if we group those into teams, what happens? Do they get better? And, why do they get better? And what's interesting about teams is, in actual fact, we do need to be willing to disagree, right? It's just that we need to do it in a way that we're not disagreeable towards one another. So as Andy was saying, be hard on the ideas and be soft on the people, or I think it's expressed in a different way too, which is, no idea above scrutiny and no person beneath dignity. But that's actually an important part, is that dialectic in a group discussion. So if we converge too early around either what we all know or what we all agree, then we actually miss those blind spots, or we miss seeing things that maybe other people mightn't see. So it's those multiple perspectives that we need to get, or what we call cognitive diversity on a team. And the teams that are more actively open-minded, they seek out that contradictory data. And that's what avoids then confirmation bias that you mentioned, Andy. And they even thank each other for constructive criticism. And they invest a lot of time understanding each other's positions, even positions they don't agree with. So one of the tasks they do is that they have to present each other's alternative views. And it's only by understanding somebody's view that you don't agree with that you can better, I suppose, present your own view, and also create that, as we call, cognitive conflict, while also balancing out what we call effective conflict, so that, we can preserve the relationship that we need. But when they brought the super forecasting teams together, the results were really staggering. If someone was good enough to be a super forecaster, I suppose, in the first place, then they got on to be brought on to a super forecasting team. And their actual accuracy of prediction improved by 50%. And the same again in year 3. So they became a super forecaster year 1, on the super forecasting team by year 2, and in both those years 2 and 3, their prediction accuracy and what we call resolution improved by 50%. The other two things super forecasting teams did was that they supported—
Ms. Fiona, there's just a few minutes left, and
thanks,
I know we're due to finish in about 3 minutes. And
I'm nearly there, Angela.
Yeah.
But they also were really, I suppose, it supports that case for psychological safety. They were also very willing to admit mistakes and also admit when they needed help. So it's really clear from Tetlock's research, I suppose, that super forecasters are more than the sum of their parts when they're brought in to work within a team. and that we do need the collective intelligence, you know, of all the members. So sometimes 1 + 1 does equal to 3, Eva, thinking back to your presentation earlier on, when it comes to collective intelligence. And it's down to 2 things: the diversity of our reasoning. Okay, so you can bring in, I suppose, yes, a diverse team from the point of view of you know, different groups being represented. But if their thinking habits are too similar, that doesn't achieve the cognitive diversity that we want. And the other thing that we need within teams is people who are actually really committed to each other and that care about how the team is going to perform as a unit. There are things we can do, by the way, when we don't have super forecasting themes. We can use extremizing algorithms to improve their accuracy. But in summary, I suppose our brains work on a good enough principle. Okay, so there are definitely going to be blind spots. We rely a lot more than we think on our beliefs about how things should happen, you know, and that includes what should happen at a meeting, how should decisions be made. And we have these models around decision making is about generating options, evaluating them, and picking the best option. But that's not how naturalistic decision making happens, actually, when we look at how experienced people make decisions in high pressure and high stakes situations. But data can definitely help because it can reduce that cognitive load from the point of view of SOPs and good frameworks. And usually a good framework is better than no framework, absolutely. But can also improve our tacit knowledge below the line as well. But really, when it comes to just, you know, doing the best jobs that we can, you know, we need to remember the data models themselves too, they have priorities and beliefs embedded in them because they're created in our own image. So we need to be actually humble about the differences between big data and small data. They're very different fields, you know, what they can do for us. At the end of the day, none of them will replace good critical thinking. So those are the cultures that we need to create most. And we need to be willing to argue and disagree without being disagreeable. And we need to realize that more data isn't always going to get us better quality decisions. More perspectives are more likely to do that. And the first thing I suppose that we need to think about is, you know, what are the answers we most need? And to do that, we need to be very precise in understanding what are the questions that we most need to ask. So if anyone has any questions on any of those issues, by all means, throw them at me. These would be the resources that I'd highly recommend. People who are interested in Alice Stewart, you know, I hadn't heard of her until a few weeks ago. She's a fascinating lady. But also these particular books, I think, are of interest maybe to people, so that we can, you know, put as much time into our collective intelligence and improving that as we do artificial intelligence. Because the good news is collective intelligence is a lot quicker to increase and improve than individual intelligence is.
I have loads of questions. That's completely fascinating, I have to say. When I think about this, I think about it as, you know, did those super forecasters have more information? So, you know, one of the things, had they just more experience over time or had been exposed, you know, to greater amounts of information and environments?
The interesting thing was, they were super forecasters because they're being compared to intelligence experts within the US military. So that's where the forecasting started. That it was called the Good Judgment Project, and it was actually supported by IARPA after 9/11. Because unfortunately, what often needs to happen for us to move our mental models is a big crisis needs to happen. We need to realize, you know, like the financial crisis of 2008, okay, our models don't work, be they data or mental models. And that's when people start to look at, okay, well, how do we improve the probabilistic judgments of political analysts? So they took just general members of the public. Now, the good news for engineers from the software point of view is there's a very high percentage of software engineers represented within the super forecasting elite. But they are ordinary people who don't have access to any US government intelligence, and they're outperforming both the US intelligence experts and the prediction markets.
That leads me, now I want to say, please, audience, because I think I found this interesting, so there must be questions, so please put your questions in the Q&A and I'll bring them to the panel. But what I was thinking then as well, so interesting that you say it's a particular, you know, maybe they're following a different career path versus others, but again, you do meet people who have different mindsets, you know, so people who are open, who are one of those people who will listen to the contrary argument because they want to learn and understand that perspective, and they're also judging their own perception of things. So I really interesting to see, are the people, you know, in some way able to process and have some information processing capabilities that are different, or are they simply of a mindset even that,
both.
you know, they're open?
Both,
Yeah,
definitely. So disposition is important. They are more willing to be proven wrong. And because of that, they make very slight adjustments to their probability forecasts. But they're also willing to look at uncertainty in a very high degree of granularity. So they're not afraid of uncertainty. So that's important. The other part that's important is they have a beginner's mind, as you kind of were alluding to there, because they assume that they don't know anything at the very beginning. They're more likely than experts to look for a base rate, right? So the experts will generally take their frame as the last case of something they saw that was similar, whereas the super forecasters don't assume anything. So they look for what we call comparable reference classes. So they might then see structural similarities. Do you see what I mean? That an expert may not see. So there's a lot of thinking habits, and they would tend to have a high level of intelligence and be quite numerical, but they weren't the things that made the big differences on the super forecasting teams. It actually wasn't about individual intelligence.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the lady who maybe had the pinprick and noticed the blood not clotting, you know, that lady is experienced as well. You know, she's not looking at this and saying, oh, that's one signal. She often looked at, you know, this, and this, and collectively, it's not quite a hunch. And I'm always thinking as a scientist, like, what information did she draw, you know, across and over and back here to add this up in her head?
And actually, what Gary Klein recommends is that we could leverage that information better than we do. So, for example, I was given the example to you earlier. We come in and we want to plan a pilot test. We're really excited. We've got the budget. We're going to run this IT project. But we're over optimistic because we want it to work. So we overlook and we don't talk about all the things that could go wrong. So what Gary Klein recommends software teams do is, in actual fact, meet and do a pre-mortem. So a bit like healthcare, where post-mortems are very useful to everyone except the patient, right? But in a pre-mortem, you fast forward 6 months, the project has happened. It was a disaster. Okay, what caused it to be? And you use the expert knowledge to get an insight into what are their cues, like the blood not coagulating. What are all these rationale that they have actually hidden away that's tacit? And it's only sometimes by painting the worst case scenario that they then start to volunteer that information, because everybody wants to be seen as optimistic about a future project, when in actual fact what you most need is to find out quickly what could go wrong.
Yeah, and it's back, you're working your way back here. So to Andy's point, you know, and bringing in the collective voices alone, is that you're allowing people to bring past experiences or knowledge to the table and to display that, but without any bias, without others, you know, impacting the loudest voice in the room. So you're kind of thinking, okay, and it is that human factor that does cause things. And, you know, you outlined the agile sprint system, which seems to work, I think, for the software, you know, side of the industries. And then you have, you know, this is something, this agile process has been used and can be used in many other places and applications. And it is piecemeal, if you like. We're doing this piece, and then we can look at it, and everybody's in agreement to getting to a point. So in your kind of work, you know, what you see interacting with organizations, you know, how far along are they? Particularly, maybe, you know, is there a better practice in one type of industry versus another in terms of how people work and get better outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the design sprint methodology, it's only one framework, you know, like there are different frameworks for software development, but I mean, I learned it originally through more on the startup side and the startup scene, and being involved in a New Frontiers program, which you're familiar with, and originally, and that allowed me to sort of to cross-pollinate that back into an industry that maybe traditionally would leverage different frameworks. And in the experience then in the pharmaceutical industry, in my experience, I hadn't seen that kind of a framework being used. But then traditionally, the industry is less agile, and it's only maybe over the last number of years is everybody trying to apply a more iterative approach in the industry to be able to speed up the development, because there's a lot of pains obviously in the medical world. There's a lot of problems that we need to solve, and a lot of money and a lot of people willing to do it. So it's just a matter of what's the fastest approach that we can take that will get people together and actually get them solving a problem. I know a software development problem is a very, very small piece of drug development, but there's it's all about the collective starts in a workshop in a very small scene, but it extends all the way up to everybody's working together on a new novel drug and making sure it hits market. So it's the bigger picture. It's the imagination to have the bigger picture while you're working on the small detail.
And how much room is there for change? So I've come from the medtech industry, highly regulated. Okay, so to change the ingredients in a dye, that's putting a number on a package that's just housing the actual device, unbelievable amount of paperwork, data, and maybe a resubmission because there's a component that's changed within it. Then to Eva and her point, every single move that you make has to be recorded. How much wiggle room is there for that? Let's transition into a more agile method. Does even digitization help with that? What are your thoughts, or what are you seeing around that?
Yeah, I would say that the digitization itself is not is a tool. Like all it is just just like we see that all the time. It's not going to be the be all and end all, but the digitization itself does allow us to explore new sort of ways of bringing people together and new ways of solving a common problem. And I think that's what's important about digital transformation, is that we're given these new tools by which you can achieve a better outcome. But it's the implementation of the tools that is important to ensure that we're going to use the tools right. I suppose it's like Fiona, I see you're nodding there. You can definitely take that back to like a surgeon and a scalpel or something.
No, my observation was going to be about Google flu trends, because that's a very good example of a digital tool that potentially could have been really, really useful. But unless you understand the heuristics behind the tool itself, you don't understand its limitations. And I had never heard of Google flu trends until I suppose a few months ago, but back in the 80s, wasn't it? Wherever Google started, they started mapping and trying to predict when there'd be outbreaks of flu in the United States. And it worked really, really well. It was very accurate for the first something like 6 months. But then it started to get less accurate because of that prompting that Google does when you're using search terms. It prompts you to search using a different, it gives you suggestions. So in actual fact, its effectiveness was really, really compromised by that. So it couldn't be used then in the context of pandemics. But so again, unfortunately, while you're right in saying there's great potential in digital health and what it can do for us, we also need to remember that some of the best digital minds are there creating clickbait campaigns, and they're the very things then that undermine how useful those tools could be for public health. So I think we need to demand a lot more from those big companies that have all our data, because they could be helping us probably a lot more than they are.
Yeah, so that's interesting. The audience is really quiet, so this is your last chance, audience, and it'll save me asking all the questions, because I have loads. But if you have anything and you want to reach out to the guys, we'll follow up with the presentation. I think in time we'll get that down. It's quite large, and we'll also try to get the recording. We've done a number of these webinars. The recording tends to be massive, and there's a good bit of work in trying to process that, so it won't be as readily available, but we'll come back to you. And also, any of you are welcome to reach out to Andy, Eva, Fiona, or myself, or Sir Fel at all at any time. I guess I was thinking you know, to the data integrity piece, and, you know, that whole huge amount of data from development to validation, testing of at all points, you know, verification and validation, and then through to even post-market, huge volumes of data being created. Another thing that stuck out as well at the end is, well, vendor data. And one of them, I think, is where you're asking a vendor to manage your data. Maybe it's paper files in the past and it's a storage capacity, but now you're heading into clouds and security. But even vendors that are supplying in. So vendors who are holding data for you and maybe managing it, but also vendors that are they going to be compliant? And how do you manage if you have to trace and track back to maybe a component or a material? How do you manage that?
So I suppose in terms of vendor data, there's vendors data, and then there's data that vendors are producing on behalf of a customer or generating that is essentially customer data. So the same diligence that you would have for your in-house data has to be applied to data that vendor is generating on your behalf. Whether you're contracting out something, maybe you're contracting out testing, maybe you're some type of analysis, that's still the business's data. So the same rules and regulations apply to that data. And that data, it needs to be the same availability. So it's very important in terms of, if you have an SLA or a vendor agreement, a quality technical agreement, that needs to detail all of the things that would allow you to say your data is ALCOA compliant. So the availability of that data, the retrievability of that data, that vendor goes out of business, for example, what happens to that data? It's your data. In terms of the vendor practices and what they do on a day-to-day basis, certainly in terms of vendor audits and, looking at a vendor's quality management system, that's part of the due diligence around hiring your vendor, contracting your vendor. But there has to be within an SLA or a QTA how your data will be managed in the short term and the long term, and the availability. So it's something that can't be parked. And if you look at Annex 11, there's quite in Europe, there's quite a substantial piece in Annex 11 around vendor management and data management. So just in terms of what Fiona said, like we can't get away. We have to generate data. We have evidence in terms of the activities we've completed. So we're not saying that we can suddenly start the conversation and move away from that data. We have to generate data based on predicate rule requirements at a minimum, and that is the minimum amount of data we need to generate. But then when you get into the area of out of specs, out of trends, there's so much information there that we then need to make decisions on. And that's where our cognitive reasoning comes into play, along with being able to look at the patterns of that data.
We're out of time, and it remains just to thank you guys. I have to offer a piece of advice. I can say large companies probably have people dedicated to this, but there's still a lot of transition and movement from the paper to hybrid to electronic. What I would say, if there are earlier stage companies listening, is start that process. It was spoken about earlier. Get anything down. Everything that you're doing, record it, date it. You make some shape at having that system, and then as you move, particularly in the healthcare space, through, you're going to have your quality management systems. But the fact that you have the mindset and you practice that from the very outset, and that you have that culture embedded on your team is really, really important. So that'll be my takeaway from moving from corporate to smaller and working with smaller organizations. But Eva, Andy, Fiona, amazing. I really enjoyed it. I think the interaction through the polls was fantastic, and your fantastic speakers. Thanks very much for contributing today, and for everybody kind of tuning in as well. Come back to us, any of us, if needed. All right. Take care.
Thanks,
guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Keep an eye on your data. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.